The Deadly Code of Roman Tunics, a story of class and survival. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Subura, Rome's most notorious district, as Marcus Flavius adjusted his coarse woolen tunic. The muted brown fabric, dyed with cheap madder root, fell just above his knees, the prescribed length for his plebeian class. Too long would mock the senatorial class, too short would appear barbaric. Both mistakes could prove fatal in a city where clothing spoke louder than words. The single stripe of faded red running down his tunic declared his station to every passerby, free but forever separated from the elite by threads and dye that cost more than his family earned in a year. In the streets around him, Rome's rigid hierarchy played out in fabric, slaves in plain, undyed tunics of rough hemp, freedmen in slightly better linen, carefully navigating between prosperity and presumption. Marcus's destination was his father's textile workshop, where Gaius Flavius had spent 30 years mastering the art of Roman clothing. The old weaver understood better than most how a single thread could mean the difference between life and death. The purple trade is what you must understand, his father often said. It's not just color, it's power made visible. Purple dye, extracted from thousands of murex shells, was more valuable than gold. Tyrian purple, the deepest shade, was reserved exclusively for the emperor. A single ounce required over 10,000 shells, its production controlled by imperial decree. In the workshop, Gaius examined a bolt of pale violet cloth with the intensity of a general studying battle plans. "One shade too deep," he muttered, "and the man who wears this becomes a traitor to the state." The workshop contained Rome's entire social hierarchy in textile form. Young apprentice Lucius worked at creating the narrow stripes that served as Rome's social identification system. Thin stripes for equestrians, broad bands for senators, each width precisely regulated by law. "The Angusta Clavius marks the equestrian order," Lucius recited when tested. "Exactly 1 finger's width. The latus clavus, the broad senatorial stripe, is 3 fingers wide. The penalty for falsely claiming senatorial rank is death." This education kept their family alive in a city where sumptuary laws were enforced with brutal efficiency. The tunic appeared simple, 2 rectangles of cloth sewn together, but every detail communicated the wearer's place in society. As customers arrived throughout the day, Marcus observed the delicate negotiations. A young equestrian needed his stripes adjusted to reflect his new rank. Precision was everything. A freedman sought tunics appropriate to his status, walking the dangerous line between appearing too wealthy or dishonoring his patron. The day's crisis came with the final customer. A nervous, well-dressed man who whispered his request. "I need a tunic with the broad stripe. I can pay whatever you ask." The workshop fell silent. This man was asking them to create a garment that would allow him to impersonate a senator, a crime punishable by death for everyone involved. His trembling hands offered a purse heavy with gold, pleading about family honor. As Gaius weighed the tempting gold against their lives, Marcus understood that his father's workshop sat at the center of a web of power and deception stretching from the Subura to the Palatine Hill. The weaver's greatest skill wasn't working the loom, it was knowing when not to weave at all. Senator Lucius Cornelius Maximus adjusted his broad purple stripe before his bronze mirror, the latus clavus representing 30 generations of power. Yet today, word had reached him through his network of informants. Someone in the Subura was crafting false senatorial tunics. The implications chilled him more than any military threat. His Greek slave, Alexandros, fastened the golden fibulae of his toga with practiced skill. "The quality of weaving has improved considerably, Dominus," the educated slave observed. "The craftsmen grow more skilled each year." But skill brought danger. If common weavers could produce garments indistinguishable from imperial workshops, then Rome's social order faced a threat more insidious than barbarian armies. "Tell me about the sumptuary laws," Maximus tested his slave. "Death "For falsely claiming senatorial rank through dress," Alexandros replied carefully. "But the real penalty is social. A man wearing wrong clothing destroys his family's reputation for generations." The morning's first visitor was Marcus Junius Brutus, descendant of Caesar's assassin. His senatorial tunic was impeccable, but something troubled Maximus about the purple stripe. The quality exceeded even imperial workshops, too perfect, marking it as likely from the unauthorized craftsman they sought. "New tailor?" Maximus inquired casually. Brutus shifted uncomfortably. "My usual workshop was unavailable. I found a craftsman in the Subura." After Brutus left, Maximus summoned Quintus, his security chief, a freed gladiator whose loyalty was absolute. "I need information about textile workshops in the Subura. Someone is producing senatorial tunics good enough to fool inspection." "Should I involve the urban praetor?" Quintus asked. "Not yet. If we move officially, they'll disappear like smoke." Dim. From his balcony overlooking the Forum, Maximus observed Rome's social theatre. Each class wore their status: equestrians with narrow stripes, slaves in plain tunics, freedmen carefully balancing prosperity with humility. But the middle ground, ambitious freedmen and minor officials, represented the greatest danger to established order. A street argument caught his attention. Two men disputing over questionable equestrian stripes. Such confrontations were becoming common as luxury goods reached more citizens, testing sumptuary laws through abundance rather than scarcity. When Quintus returned with his findings, the news was devastating. The network isn't just producing false tunics, they're creating entire false identities, complete ensembles, allowing movement through society as if born to unearned positions. How many? At least 30 documented cases, possibly 60. And Dominus. Some are already sitting in the Senate. The foundation of Roman authority was compromised. If senators wore false credentials woven into their clothing, then the careful balance holding the empire together was shattered. "We need more evidence," Maximus decided, knowing time was running out. The morning's arrests would warn the guilty to disappear, taking any chance of understanding the conspiracy's depth. On the Ides of Martius, 3 worlds collided in the Subura's narrow streets. Marcus Flavius arrived at his father's workshop to find it surrounded by urban soldiers, their bronze armor gleaming ominously. His heart sank. This was no routine inspection, but a formal investigation that could mean death for everyone involved. Inside, Gaius Flavius stood with resigned dignity as soldiers catalogued every thread. Hidden beneath loose floorboards lay 3 completed tunics, bearing perfect senatorial stripes, their quality virtually indistinguishable from imperial workshops. "The workmanship is extraordinary," admitted Centurion Cassius. "If I didn't know these were forgeries, I would swear they came from the palace." The investigation revealed a sophisticated network operating throughout the city for months, commissioning illegal garments from skilled craftsmen and selling them to wealthy clients who could afford both the price and the risk. Meanwhile, Senator Maximus was discovering his own investigation had yielded devastating results. Quintus returned with news that struck at Roman society's core. The network isn't just producing false tunics. They're creating entire false identities. Complete ensembles allowing movement through society as if born to positions never earned. How many? Maximus dreaded the answer. At least 30 documented cases, possibly 60. And Dominus, some are already sitting in the Senate. If senators themselves wore false credentials, the empire's foundation was compromised. The careful balance of power depended on trust, that each man was what he appeared to be, that rank symbols were earned rather than purchased. The third player in this deadly game was Marcus Junius Brutus, moving confidently toward the Senate House, wearing a tunic that proclaimed his legitimate senatorial right. But Brutus carried a secret that would cost him his life, if discovered. While his ancient family's claim to senatorial rank was unquestionable, the tunic he wore was one of Gaius Flavius's forgeries. The irony was bitter. Brutus had commissioned the illegal garment not to falsify his status, but because the quality surpassed legitimate channels. The Subura's craftsmen had learned to exceed imperial standards, creating garments so perfect that even those entitled to wear them preferred the forgeries to the originals. In the Senate House, routine debates on grain distribution and provincial reports proceeded normally, but beneath familiar rhythms lay unprecedented tension. Men wearing legitimate rank sat beside others whose credentials were literally counterfeit. The conversations shaping imperial policy occurred between actors who no longer knew which colleagues were authentic. Crisis erupted when news of the arrests reached the chamber. The urban praetor had taken action against counterfeiting operations, and prominent citizens were under investigation for false senatorial regalia. The chamber fell silent. If senatorial dress integrity couldn't be guaranteed, how could senatorial authority itself be maintained? The symbols unifying Roman society for centuries were revealed as purchasable commodities. Senator Gaius Asinius Pollio rose to address the crisis. If any citizen can purchase the appearance of senatorial rank, then the rank itself becomes meaningless. We must restore the integrity of our sacred symbols. But even as Pollio spoke, observers noted something troubling about his magnificent tunic. The purple stripe was too perfect, displaying quality surpassing even the emperor's garments. In demonstrating his legitimacy, Pollio inadvertently revealed his own fall to superior craftsmanship's temptation. The debate that followed marked the moment Rome's ruling class confronted the uncomfortable truth that their power had always depended as much on theatrical display as genuine authority. The rigid hierarchy that prevented civil war among 30 million people was cracking under the pressure of abundance and skill. The praetor's judgment was severe. Gaius Flavius received a death sentence for treasonous counterfeiting. His workshop was ordered destroyed, its contents burned publicly to demonstrate the consequences of challenging Roman authority through textile deception. But deeper questions couldn't be resolved through executions. Roman society had discovered its most cherished symbols could be replicated by skilled craftsmen in the Subura's shadows. Purple, once rarer than gold, was now available to anyone willing to pay the price and accept the risk. The execution took place in the Forum Romanum, where Gaius Flavius faced his death with the same dignity he had shown in his workshop. As the crowd watched, Marcus understood that his father's crime hadn't been counterfeiting, it had been excellence. The old weaver's skill had exposed the fragility of a system built on scarcity and appearance. As evening fell, Marcus Flavius stood in his father's workshop ruins, surrounded by beautiful cloth ashes and broken dreams of social mobility through textile mastery. He understood now why his father always said a weaver's greatest skill was knowing when not to weave at all. The lesson was written in purple thread and sealed with blood. In Rome, the line between legitimate authority and skillful imitation was as thin as silk and twice as dangerous to cross. Those who attempted to blur that line through superior craftsmanship would discover that the empire's response was neither subtle nor forgiving. The eternal city would continue dressing its hierarchy in power's colors, but everyone now knew those colors could be bought, sold, and perfectly replicated. Rome endured as always, but the Romans walking its streets would never again look at purple stripes with the same assumption of automatic legitimacy. The empire of appearances had learned that appearances, no matter how carefully regulated, could never be completely controlled. And in the workshops of the Subura, young apprentices would whisper the story of Gaius Flavius, the weaver whose skill was so perfect it became treason, and whose death proved that in Rome, some talents were too dangerous to possess. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the deadly serious world of Roman fashion and social hierarchy, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories from ancient history. What aspect of Roman clothing laws surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Your insights help us create even better content about the ancient world that shaped our modern society. The directness that his patron valued. Some of them are already sitting in the Senate. The implications hit Maximus like a physical blow. If senators themselves were wearing false credentials, literally woven into their clothing, then the entire foundation of Roman authority was compromised. The careful balance of power that had held the empire together for centuries depended on trust. Trust that each man was what he appeared to be, that the symbols of rank were earned rather than purchased. We need more evidence, Maximus decided. Accusations without proof will only create panic and destroy innocent reputations along with guilty ones. But even as he spoke, Maximus knew that time was running out. The morning's arrests in the Subura would send shockwaves through the conspiracy, warning the guilty to cover their tracks and disappear. They had perhaps hours before the entire network dissolved, taking with it any chance of understanding how deep the corruption had spread. The third player in this deadly game was moving through the streets of Rome with the confidence that came from wearing perfect camouflage. Marcus Junius Brutus, the same descendant of Caesar's assassin who had visited Maximus days earlier, made his way toward the Senate house wearing a tunic that proclaimed his legitimate right to participate in the empire's highest deliberative body. But Brutus carried a secret that would have cost him his life if discovered. His family's ancient claim to senatorial rank was genuine, traced back through 30 generations of distinguished service. His right to wear the broad purple stripe was unquestionable under Roman law. Yet the tunic he wore that morning was one of the forgeries produced in Gaius Flavius's workshop. The irony was lost on no one who knew the full story. Brutus had commissioned the illegal garment not to falsify his status, but because the quality surpassed anything available through legitimate channels. The craftsmen of the Subura had learned to exceed the standards of imperial workshops, creating garments so perfect that even those entitled to wear them preferred the forgeries to the originals. As Brutus entered the Curia, the ancient meeting place of the Roman Senate, he passed beneath statues of the great legislators who had built the empire's legal framework. The 12 Tables, Rome's first written laws, had established the principle that each citizen must dress according to his station. The Lex Oppia had refined these restrictions during wartime. Countless subsequent regulations had created the complex system that now governed every thread, every stripe, every shade of dye that Romans were permitted to wear. Yet none of these laws had anticipated the possibility that legal authority and superior craftsmanship might diverge so dramatically. The system assumed that those with the right to wear imperial purple would also have access to the best materials and methods for producing it. When that assumption proved false, the entire structure of Roman dress codes began to collapse. The session that morning dealt with routine matters, reports from provincial governors, debates over public works projects, discussions of grain distribution to the urban masses. But beneath the familiar rhythms of senatorial debate lay tensions that none of the participants fully understood. Men who wore legitimate symbols of rank sat beside others whose credentials were literally counterfeit. The conversations that shaped imperial policy were taking place between actors who no longer knew which of their colleagues were playing roles and which were authentically what they appeared to be. The crisis came to a head when news of the morning's arrests reached the Senate House. A messenger arrived with word that the urban praetor had taken action against a counterfeiting operation and that several prominent citizens were under investigation for wearing false senatorial regalia. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. If the integrity of senatorial dress could not be guaranteed, then how could the legitimacy of senatorial authority itself be maintained? The symbols that had unified Roman society for centuries were revealed to be purchasable commodities, available to anyone with sufficient gold and discretion. Senator Gaius Asinius Pollio, whose family had served Rome since the time of Augustus, rose to address the chamber. His voice carried the authority of unquestioned legitimacy as he spoke. Honored colleagues, we face a crisis that strikes at the very heart of Roman civilization. If any citizen can purchase the appearance of senatorial rank, then the rank itself becomes meaningless. We must act swiftly and decisively to restore the integrity of our most sacred symbols. But even as Pollio spoke, observers in the gallery noted something troubling about his magnificent senatorial tunic. The purple stripe was perfect, too perfect, in fact, displaying a quality of weaving and dyeing that surpassed even the emperor's own garments. In trying to demonstrate his unassailable legitimacy, Pollio had inadvertently revealed that he too had fallen victim to the temptation of superior craftsmanship. The debate that followed would be remembered as one of the most significant in Roman history, though not for the legislation it produced or the policies it established. Instead, it marked the moment when Rome's ruling class confronted the uncomfortable truth that their power had always depended as much on theatrical display as on genuine authority. As the sun reached its zenith over the Forum Romanum, casting sharp shadows between the ancient columns, the three threads of the story finally converged. Marcus Flavius watched from the crowd as his father was led away in chains, understanding that the old man's exceptional skill had made him both valuable and dangerous to the established order. Senator Maximus sat in his curule chair, wrestling with the knowledge that the institution he had served faithfully for 3 decades was built on foundations less solid than he had believed. And Brutus, descendant of the man who had killed Caesar to preserve the Republic, realized that he was watching the symbolic murder of something equally fundamental, the idea that appearance and reality could be trusted to align. The praetor's judgment, when it came, was as severe as everyone had feared. Gaius Flavius was sentenced to death for treasonous counterfeiting of imperial symbols. His workshop was ordered destroyed, its contents burned in a public ceremony intended to demonstrate the consequences of challenging Roman authority through textile deception. But the deeper questions raised by the affair could not be resolved through executions and public spectacles. Roman society had discovered that its most cherished symbols could be replicated by skilled craftsmen working in the shadows of the Subura. The purple that had once been rarer than gold was now available to anyone willing to pay the price and accept the risk. As evening fell over the eternal city, Marcus Flavius stood in the ruins of his father's workshop, surrounded by the ashes of beautiful cloth and the broken dreams of social mobility through textile mastery. He understood now why his father had always said that a weaver's greatest skill was knowing when not to weave at all. The lesson was written in purple thread and sealed with blood. In Rome, the line between legitimate authority and skillful imitation was as thin as silk and twice as dangerous to cross. Those who attempted to blur that line through superior craftsmanship would discover that the empire's response to such challenges was neither subtle nor forgiving. The eternal city would continue to dress its hierarchy in the colors of power and privilege. But everyone now knew that those colors could be bought, sold, and perfectly replicated by anyone with sufficient skill and courage. And that knowledge changed everything, even as it changed nothing at all. Rome endured, as it always did. But the Romans who walked its streets would never again look at a purple stripe with quite the same assumption of automatic legitimacy. The empire of appearances had learned that appearances, no matter how carefully regulated, could never be completely controlled. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the deadly serious world of Roman fashion and social hierarchy, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories from ancient history. What aspect of Roman clothing laws surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Your insights help us create even better content about the ancient world that shaped our modern society.